Week 11 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers I look to drop this week. The first guy, Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. So Wan'Dale Robinson, his rookie year hasn't been that great of a year for him. I know he came back in Week 6 and 7 had good ball games, but the last few weeks here, we haven't seen much out of him. Week 8 at Seattle, 2 catches, 15 yards. Week 9 a bye, and then Week 10 versus Houston, 2 catches, 20 yards, and he had a rush attempt for -5 yards. So I know Week 11 he's got a good matchup versus the Lions. I give up the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. But right now, this Giant team, they're just not a pass-first team over there in New York. I know Darius Slayton's been good, but besides him, no one else has been consistent. A lot of injuries this week at other positions and bye weeks, obviously. And right now, Robinson's a wide receiver I would drop, still owned in 35% of fantasy leagues. The next guy is Chase Claypool of the Chicago Bears. So Chase Claypool, so far, he just hasn't gotten anything going for his new team. And I know it takes some time, but it's crunch time already here in the fantasy football season in Week 11. So Claypool, the last few games, Week 8, he had 4 catches, 45 yards, and a passing touchdown in his final Steelers game. Week 9 versus Miami, a carry, 4 yards, 2 catches, 13 yards. And Week 10 versus the Lions, 2 targets, a catch, 8 yards. So this week, a great matchup on paper, no doubt about it, at the Atlanta Falcons. I give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. But right here, Chase Claypool, he's not getting the targets. This is a run-heavy and run-first team with Justin Fields running most of the time for the Chicago Bear team, and him really only targeting Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney. So right now, with all those factors against Claypool, even with a good matchup here, and still only 69% of fantasy leagues, I would drop him this week in the third and final wide receiver. I would drop Michael Gallup of the Dallas Cowboys. So Michael Gallup, he's been on this list a few times this season, but he's still a guy owned in 42% of fantasy leagues, surprisingly. In the last few weeks, we haven't seen much out of Gallup. Week 7 versus Detroit, 2 targets and a goose egg. Week 8 versus Chicago, 4 catches, 49 yards in that ball game. And Week 10 at Green Bay, 4 catches, 35 yards on 7 targets. I know Week 11 he's got a good matchup at the Minnesota Vikings. I give up the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. But right here, this Cowboy team, he's pretty much targeting since he came back. Dak Prescott is CeeDee Lamb, who had a monster ball game, go over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in last week's ball game. And Dalton Schultz, who's been a mainstay and a top target at Dak. So right now, Michael Gallup, he's a wide receiver, not doing much, and a guy I would drop this week. So that's a few wide receivers I look to drop here, Week 11 of the fantasy football season.